Did the United States quietly ask Vietnam to wait? It's a question spreading rapidly across the Iraqi Dinar and Vietnamese Dong communities, generating intense discussion among investors who have followed these currencies for years. But here's the fascinating part. The question itself may not be the most important story. Instead, what this growing theory reveals about investor expectations, economic reforms, and the way people interpret global financial developments could be far more significant. Because whether or not such a request was ever made, one thing is certain: Iraq and Vietnam have become two of the most closely watched countries in the currency investment world. And many investors are now asking a bigger question. If major economic transformations occur through a sequence rather than all at once, could Iraq be viewed as the first major step? And if so, why? Today, we're separating facts from speculation, examining Iraq's ongoing reforms, Vietnam's economic rise, and exploring why the phrase, "wait for Iraq," has become one of the most discussed topics in the currency community. And before we finish, we'll reveal the one factor that may matter more than any rumor currently circulating online. Stay with us, because the answer may surprise you. Welcome back to Global Currency Watch, your source for Iraqi dinar updates, currency analysis, and global financial developments. If you're following the Iraqi dinar, the Vietnamese Dong, global currency trends, or economic reforms across emerging markets, today's analysis is one you won't want to miss. Let's dive into what is really happening behind this growing conversation. Where did this theory come from? Over the past several years, investors have closely followed both Iraq and Vietnam for completely different reasons. Iraq attracts attention because of its enormous energy resources, strategic geopolitical importance, and ongoing banking and economic reforms. Vietnam attracts attention because of its manufacturing growth, export success, foreign investment inflows, and rapidly expanding economy. As discussions surrounding both countries intensified, a theory began spreading inside certain investment communities. The theory suggests that Iraq may be positioned to complete key economic milestones first, while Vietnam could potentially follow later. Some versions of this theory go even further, suggesting that international coordination may be involved. However, according to publicly available information, there is no official evidence confirming that the United States asked Vietnam to delay any currency-related action. That distinction is extremely important. The claim remains speculation, but the discussion itself raises an interesting question. Why do so many investors believe timing matters? Why Iraq remains the center of attention? To understand the theory, we first need to understand why Iraq receives so much attention. For years, Iraq has been implementing reforms designed to modernize its banking sector. These efforts include digital payment expansion, anti-money laundering compliance, banking modernization, and financial transparency initiatives. Some observers believe these reforms are creating a stronger foundation for long-term economic development. Others argue that the pace remains slower than investors expected. Either way, Iraq continues attracting global attention. And that's where things become interesting. Many investors are not watching Iraq because of one announcement. They're watching Iraq because of a long sequence of reforms stretching across many years. That sequence matters because major economic transformations rarely happen overnight. The Vietnam story. While Iraq often dominates currency discussions, Vietnam has quietly built one of Asia's fastest-growing economies. International companies continue investing in Vietnam. Manufacturing exports remain strong. Foreign investment has expanded significantly over the past decade. Vietnam's economic development story looks very different from Iraq's. Iraq's story centers around reconstruction, energy resources, and financial modernization. Vietnam's story centers around manufacturing, exports, technology, and global trade integration. Yet investors often connect the two countries in their discussions. Why? Because both represent long-term economic growth narratives. And because many investors believe structural economic improvements eventually influence perceptions of national currencies. However, another important detail is often overlooked. Strong economic growth alone does not automatically translate into currency events that investors anticipate. The relationship is far more complex. The concept of sequencing. Now we arrive at the core of today's discussion. Sequencing. In global finance, major changes often occur in stages. Banking reforms come first. Regulatory improvements follow. Investment confidence develops gradually. Economic growth expands. Institutional credibility strengthens. Only after years of preparation do larger outcomes become possible. This is why some analysts focus less on rumors and more on process. They ask, what reforms are occurring? How sustainable are they? Are institutions becoming stronger? Is investor confidence improving? These questions may ultimately matter far more than any single headline. What role could the United States play? Another reason this theory gained attention involves the role of the United States in global economic relationships. The United States remains deeply connected to global financial systems. American policymakers, institutions, and economic relationships influence markets around the world. Some observers believe that maintaining stability remains one of the primary objectives of international economic coordination. That does not necessarily mean directing specific currency outcomes, but it does mean that stability, confidence, and orderly transitions often receive significant attention. Again, no verified evidence supports claims that the United States instructed Vietnam to wait. However, the discussion highlights how investors view America's influence on global economic systems. What investors may be missing. What happened next caught many observers by surprise. The conversation shifted away from actual reforms and toward theories, and that may be the biggest lesson of all. Many investors spend enormous amounts of time searching for secret events. Meanwhile, the most important developments are often visible in plain sight. Banking modernization, economic diversification, investment growth, infrastructure development, institutional reforms. These are measurable developments. These are factors economists can analyze. These are the foundations upon which long-term confidence is built. Best case, moderate case, and conservative case. Best case scenario. Reforms continue successfully. Investment expands. Confidence improves. Economic growth remains strong. Both Iraq and Vietnam continue strengthening their economic foundations. Moderate scenario. Progress continues but slowly. Some reforms succeed. Others face delays. Growth remains positive but uneven. Conservative scenario. Political challenges, economic uncertainty, or global disruptions slow progress. Reforms continue but at a reduced pace. Investors adjust expectations accordingly. The important point is that none of these scenarios depend solely on rumors. They depend on measurable economic developments. Common investor mistakes. One of the most common mistakes is confusing speculation with confirmation. Another is assuming that every theory must have a hidden source. A third mistake is ignoring official information while focusing exclusively on community rumors. Successful analysis requires balance. Investors should remain curious, but they should also remain disciplined. Facts matter. Evidence matters. Economic fundamentals matter. The big takeaway. So what does the phrase "wait for Iraq" really mean? Perhaps not what many people think. The real significance may be psychological rather than operational. It reflects the belief among many investors that Iraq's ongoing reforms remain one of the most important developments in the currency world. Whether that belief ultimately proves correct remains uncertain, but it explains why Iraq continues attracting so much attention. And it explains why conversations about timing, sequencing, and preparation continue spreading across investment communities. At the end of the day, the most important takeaway is simple. No verified evidence currently confirms that the United States asked Vietnam to wait for Iraq. However, the discussion reveals something fascinating about investor thinking. Many people increasingly view major economic developments as part of longer sequences rather than isolated events. And that shift in perspective may be more important than the rumor itself. The future of Iraq and Vietnam will likely be shaped by reforms, economic growth, institutional strength, and global confidence, not by speculation alone. What do you think? Do you believe Iraq remains the key country investors should watch? Or do you think Vietnam's long-term growth story deserves even more attention? Let us know in the comments below. And if you enjoy in-depth Iraqi dinar updates, currency analysis, and global financial news, make sure to subscribe to Global Currency. Watch and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.